Hi, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with my friend Alexander Garcia-Tobar, who is the co-founder and CEO of a wonderful company called Valimail. Thanks for coming to visit.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Gosh, I'm looking forward to hearing about Valimail and about all the different security work that you guys have been doing, and also about you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I look forward to this as well.
Let's go back a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this, and then maybe how the company...
Sure.
Take us up to the present a little bit. Let's hear about you.
Sure, thank you. I've been an executive or founder of companies in the high-tech sector for quite a while. I've been in both video and security. And one of the things that really switched me on was in 1998 when I moved from Boston to California. This was during the tech boom that was going on at the time. And I fell in love with the company ValiCert, which validated digital certificates. So the idea was that we would all have a cert as our passport to the world. And you could call yourself the King of France, but you would need to authenticate that you really were that, validate that that cert is really true. And so what ended up happening is we IPO'd in 2000, but I realized two basic propositions. One is that authentication is very powerful as a way to make sure you build trust, especially in a networked world. And the second thing was that you really need to focus on making sure you authenticate things people will use. So we still don't have digital certs in our back pockets. And so timing and making sure you authenticate things people are using is really valuable. And that then led to the beginnings of our company, Valimail.
Interesting. So a little bit of a PKI
oh, absolutely.
Origin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Crypto was a very big piece of this.
Yeah. Now, so tell us the company you co-founder. You've got some other co-founders. You guys got together.
Sure.
Obviously, saw a problem in the marketplace that needed to be dealt with.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, authentication is really powerful in my mind, but applied to the right things. And one of the biggest things out there that is not authenticated out of the box is the number one way we communicate with each other, and it's this thing called email that maybe people have heard about, right?
Right.
So if you look at the fact that there are 100 million email sending domains out there, but you don't know as a recipient whether that email really came from wherever it claims to come from, even within your own company, unless your company takes the right steps, you end up with a lot of fraud, a lot of abuse, a lot of brand abuse, a lot of phishing attacks, etc. And so when we looked across the entire spectrum of what are people doing to make sure that you can trust the emails you're getting, we came to realize that the solutions in the marketplace were either semi-adequate or not automated or too difficult to implement. And so we were looking at authentication implementation rates of 20 to 40% at best after 12 months, taking 2 or 3 people that long to get done. So my co-founder came up with a system that takes the onus off of the actual person or company trying to get this done and puts the onus on the vendor, i.e. us, to make sure that you can authenticate and trust emails both inside your company and outside the company.
Mm-hmm. Now, for people watching who may not totally get this, the idea, tell me if I got this right, the idea is I'd like a way, say as a receiver, when something comes in and I think it's from bob@bigbank.com, to be sure that it is.
That's correct.
And what we do now is I just sort of use my visual, I look around looking for, I don't think this looks fake. Honey, come over here, is this fake? Or something like that.
That's right.
That's what most people do now.
That's right.
I think you can do better than that, right?
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
How?
So to take a quick step back, if you look at the way that email can be abused, there's really 2 fundamental basic ways. The first is that there's something bad in the email. There's a virus, there's an attachment, there's a link that sends you to the wrong place, etc.
What's in it?
That's what's in it. That's exactly right. So that's the what. And we've built 2 decades of email security based on inspecting the emails as they come into the company to look at the what. Yeah. And we do a pretty good job at that, frankly.
So it's an important piece.
It's a very important piece, and that will continue for a very long time. But what people have kind of been remiss on is who sent it. And criminals have caught on to that. So if you look at all these modern attacks, whether you call them BEC attacks, business email compromise, you call them W2 attacks, you call them executive spoofing, all of these types of attacks, what ends up happening is you get a request for, let's say, W2s. Please send me your W2s from your CFO. If it really is your CFO, that's a normal request. And so looking at the what is in the email, there's nothing wrong with asking for W-2s. But if the sender is a criminal trying to get the W-2s of your company, then you really need to look at the who. And so instead of trying to eyeball whether it's real or not, as I mentioned earlier, it blows people away that anyone can send email as anyone unless you've actually properly implemented authentication at your own company.
Yeah.
So you're responsible for your own domain. And in the internet world these days, your domain is your brand. So if you look at some of our clients, whether it's Uber or it's the financial companies, the healthcare companies that sign up with us, you want to know that that receipt from Uber is really from Uber, and that if you click on the 20% off, you're not going to get infected. And so each owner of their own domain, in this case Uber, has to make sure that their email is authenticated, not only for themselves, but for everybody else on the planet that receives an email that claims to be Uber.
Now help me with the authentication process. How
Sure.
do I ground the reported sender of an email with
Sure.
some infrastructure related thing? And I think there's some standards that help with that.
That's right. That's right. So one of the fortunate things as we looked at, the mission of the company was to authenticate the world's communications. And we're starting with email because of some open standards that were adopted about 5 years ago. Most people may have heard of something called DMARC. It's an open standard, and it relies...
DMARC.
That's right, that's right. And it's a domain-based authentication approach that is respected by pretty much most gateways across the planet, whether it's Gmail, Microsoft O365, or the Symantec's of the world, Mimecast, Proofpoints, etc. And so the nice thing about that is we've all agreed as a internet consortium that we're going to check for the DMARC status of an email before we let it in. And then you now need to, so that check is going on as a recipient of it, but you need to set up the actual policy, and you have to set it up properly in order for the recipient to be able to carry out good instructions.
Would it be possible for some rogue hacking group to say, publish DMARC records for IBM? How would that be
Sure.
policed?
So these records, so whether it's SPF and DKIM, which are 15-year-old standards that DMARC relies upon, or whether it's DMARC itself, the good thing about that is this is tied into the DNS of a specific company. And so DNS is essentially the phone book. We view it as a secure database, essentially. So not anyone can say that they're Uber.
Right.
Only Uber can say they're
Right.
Uber. And that's the way this protocol works, which
So
makes
it grounds
it secure.
It takes
It grounds it.
infrastructure
That's right.
and connects it to the
That's right.
things. My wife and I are looking at an email. Is this from our bank? I can have maybe some confidence.
And look, I always think it's good to be aware of your surroundings when you're walking late at night. I think it's great to look at who's sending things to you. But if you have not done authentication for your own company, you can, a criminal, anyone can send email exactly as that company, and there's no way you can visually inspect that and figure out if it's real or not. It's just, you can't see that, especially not a layperson. Even experts, 9 out of 10 times, can't figure out if it's a fish or not a fish. So it's very important to implement these open standards. And here comes the challenge, though. These standards are built on 15-year-old concepts of how email gets sent. So the cloud didn't exist back then. So now you have companies that may have 12, 24, 36 services that send as them. So no one really understands this.
Instead of like an email server in a database.
Yeah, it
with
used
an
to be
IP
the
address.
good old days
Right.
is you had a server in your closet or in a colo somewhere, and it sent all your email for you. Today, as we outsource services, as Uber essentially outsources the people that send receipts for them, for example. They outsource their payroll. They outsource all sorts of functions, just like all modern companies do. But those sources, those services need to be able to send as the company. If you got a receipt from SparkPost or from SendGrid with your Uber receipt, you'd say, what is this? So they need to be able to legitimately send as Uber. So the whole challenge here is to use old standards in manual ways to allow the good services that are approved to send as your company through, because you don't want those blocked, but to block everything else. And therein comes the challenge of setting up the right policies.
Got it. Now tell us about your platform. You guys have some
Sure.
amazing capabilities and features in the platform, including some new things. Take us through.
Yeah, sure. So from inception, the whole concept was this should be easy enough that my mother can implement it. It literally was the way we looked at this. Yeah. And I'm not sure we've gotten quite there yet, but no insult, Mom.
Or Dad. Right?
Or Dad, but we're pretty close. And so the whole idea is that instead of having companies have to work within their own DNS and try to set up these very complex systems, ones that actually break if you try to use even more than just a couple services, what our clients do is they point the protocols to us and we act as a bouncer. We're not a cop, we're a bouncer. And what that means is someone sends an email as one of our clients. It gets to, let's say, your Gmail account or a company's email account. Before it gets delivered, it bounces off of us. So it goes to the DNS of the client. The client says, go ask Valimail. It asks us, and we reply with a response, let that email through or don't let it through. Very much like a bouncer at a nightclub. You're on the list, you get in. You're not on the list, sorry. And so what we can do is actually really focus on the good, the known allowed services they're going to send, and everyone else just gets rejected. And so what ends up happening now is anyone trying to send as you will only be able to do so if your company has allowed that. All of this is automatic. It's behind, essentially Amazon Cloud Services. We have multiple POPs around the world to address local, regional laws, regional data requirements, etc. And the user does nothing. As a user, all you see is that the emails you get from whichever company's done this are actually trustworthy. And so that deals with people, criminals, trying to abuse you by sending emails as your domain. But you still end up now with two other ways that people can spoof. And one way is called the lookalike or the untrusted domain approach. This is where you get an email from Amazon with a 0 or IBM with a 1 instead of an I. And so what we have is we have the ability to authoritatively state whether it's a trusted domain, focusing on the good. And we have a corpus of many tens of millions of domains we know are good because we've done background checks on all of these domains ahead of time. And those get through. The other ones either get a question mark or get shunted into a questionable folder, quarantine, rejected.
Because there's an infinity of things you can do there.
And it's, if you try to focus on the bad in this case, you're going to just you're going to run out. There's so many permutations of how to spell.
That problem.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one. And then the other one that's a bane of a lot of people's existence, including large companies, is they can't ban Gmail, Hotmail, these consumer email addresses. And so they say, well, how do we make sure that those aren't spoofs? Because as we talked about authentication, you can sign up as ed.amoroso@gmail.com if it's not already taken, and Gmail's not going to validate that you really are you. And so how do you prevent those from going through? So we have a system that allows you to also make sure that only known senders can send to you, and we have a way to address people that maybe new that are sending for the first time. And so when you put together all of these three different methods of attack, your domain getting abused, lookalike domains, and then people sending through Gmail, you now created what we call a trust layer. And the nice thing about that trust layer is you now are addressing the who sent it. It's a complete solution now that provides for a layered approach. You got the who sent it, and then you have what's in the email. And the end result in your inbox is it's trusted sender and it's good content, which ultimately is what you're looking for if you want to trust email.
God, that sounds so good. I've heard that marketers are getting excited now because there's extensions to the standard that allow you to put logos in. Tell me,
that's
is it called
BIMI?
BIMI.
That's right.
How does that work? That sounds like something people are going to want to do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you start thinking about what can you do if you actually trust email, right? There's so many really cool things you can do. And that's the world that we're pushing to achieve. If you can trust your number one communications platform, then you can do things like BIMI, like you mentioned. We're the chair of BIMI. This is a cross-industry, cross-vendor effort. And what we've been doing is working with the largest ISPs, ESPs in the world to support this standard. And there's going to be an announcement very soon, a very large additional player. But Microsoft and Verizon Services, they all support it. There's others as well.
Good.
And What this means is if you authenticate your email, you get to see your logo next to the email versus seeing a question mark or nothing. And so consumers and recipients say, if I see the logo of a company, I can trust it. And so now your CMO is going to run over and give you a big hug because you are now promoting the brand. We actually had a CMO tell us, wait a minute, you're telling me that for free I can get billions of impressions? And we're like, yes. So it is a way to do right for the security and trust of email and also gain on so many different fronts. There's one other thing that makes marketers really excited, and this may not be known. There's a 5 to 10% increase in deliverability once you start authenticating your email properly.
Okay. More gets through.
So more gets through, which means if you attach 5 to 10% uplift in your revenue, that probably is something that makes this the first security product you've ever bought that can actually increase your top line revenue.
Email really is important to a business, isn't it?
It is when you think about it. It's one of those utilities, Ed. You know, like we don't think about electricity until it's gone, right? You don't think about email until it's gone. And we've had clients where their email systems have been taken down by abusers. So an abuser will send as a company. The company gets a bad reputation in the eyes of the Googles and the Microsofts because it is bad. And there's no way for them to stop it unless they authenticate and stop the scammers from abusing their domains. And so that hurts your reputation online and it hurts your brand with consumers.
Let me ask you kind of a future type question.
Sure, absolutely.
I would believe that despite the fact that for 20 years we've predicted the demise of email, it never has happened, and I don't think it will. Do you think that increasingly there'll be other forms of, say, over-the-top communication that'll require this sort of thing? Like I might send you a LinkedIn message and we might communicate. Do you think the basic concepts of DMARC are going to need to be extended to a broader set of, say, social interaction and peer-to-peer and other types of, or do you see that coming, or do you really think this is really just an email?
Let me answer with some stats and then with kind of a prediction. You can buy me a beer if I'm right. I'll buy you one if I'm not.
I'll buy you one anyway.
Thank you. So to start with, if you look at the way email is used, about 2/3 of email is either B2B or B2C, right? Business to business.
2/3, you say?
2/3 is business to business or business to consumer or consumer to business. 1/3 is consumer to consumer. It's that 1/3 that's seeing a decline in usage, because if you think about the way we communicate with each other, we text each other, we might use Slack at a company. There's all these other ways that we do this. So that has been declining about 30% over the next 3 years, 4 years or so, and a significant decline. But the 2/3 has been increasing by about 30% as well. And so the overall net thing is that you see an increase in the use of email. And it's not just that email is increasing in use, it's also being used for more innovative things. I mentioned the Uber receipt when you get out of your cab. All of us get email receipts after we do something. You buy something from Square, also a client, you actually get a receipt. And that receipt has to be trusted in order for you to have a proof of that purchase. And so it's so important now, it's become a very integral part of e-commerce. So I'm not worried that email is going to disappear in the next 5 years or so. But I do think that different methods of communications all have the same dynamics. So we now have this thing called smishing, right? That's phishing through SMS, where you get an SMS and it's not real. There is an equivalent to DMARC that's being promoted by the large carriers. So there are many different communication methods that are going on that are actually adding a lot of different types of authentication on top. And in fact, we are looking at IoT as the next step after email, because if we think that it's bad to get a phished email, you can imagine you have a pacemaker, it gets instructions from the hospital to beat faster, but it turns out it wasn't the hospital. Or your Tesla gets an update and it's not really a Tesla update. Or even worse, the nuclear power plant's valve gets an update and it turns out that it's not actually a real update. And this is real stuff. If you read what's going on with voting machines lately, how do you know as a state election official when you get an email and says, please update your voting machines? how do you know that by updating it, you're not helping a foreign actor, a state actor, or whether it's really the actual vendor? So all of these things get tied together into a broad need for authentication, as I mentioned when we first started talking, and for that to be a fundamental way that we create trust when we live in a world where we don't always see each other in person and can't actually authenticate each other in person.
Wonderful thoughts. You enjoy running the company?
I do. I mean, you know, I won't. I will say it's not for the faint of heart. There's never a boring moment. We are now at a stage of the company where it's very weird for me that I don't actually know every single small thing that goes on.
Yeah, that's a tough
and
moment.
It's, yeah, you know, you have to get to a point where you have a trusted middle layer of management and that you trust your people. You trust but verify, of course, but you trust that they are able to perform and you measure. And that is a very different approach than running around doing everything yourself, so to speak. So it's been a maturing event for me. I feel like I've developed a lot and I still have a lot to go. But it has been a really great ride. We're so thankful to our clients and to people like you for helping to support the mission that we're on.
Well, I've told you before, I'm a great admirer of you and your company. You're very
That's very kind of you.
I love the space. I can't imagine anybody watching this who's not, you know, publishing records and working with a company like Valimail to do this right. There's really no downside.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's downside. You put something in and like you buy this big hunk of something and it reduces performance or costs you this. So there's no downside to this. This is
as long as it's done correctly,
upside.
it's all upside. Yeah. And I will say this, Ed, and I mean this for anyone that's watching this. We have an industry expert. He is on the chair of BIMI, as I mentioned. He is the chairman of MOG, the big messaging working group.
Supported those groups for decades.
He supported those groups for decades. Oh, you did, yeah.
I did, but I know your team
and
as
so
well.
we've supported it since we started. Another one is we're the secretary at the ITF for the DMARC standard itself to try to evolve it into a 2.0.
Keep doing that.
Thank you. And so what I'd like to say is if anyone is even interested, not on commercials, but just to learn more, we're happy to make this person available. They don't talk to the salespeople, they're not allowed to, they report to the CTO, and that resource is available to anyone that wants to use it. We encourage you to come and ask questions and learn more about how this works.
So somebody in your company is going to get about 100 emails.
Well, if we can help, that'd be great.
Hey, that's worth it. Hey, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much, Ed. I appreciate it. Absolutely. That's been great.
Keep doing it.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time.
Thank you.